I had one hand on a century-old newel post when a woman in a visor and pearls kicked my sawhorse and shouted with fury in her voice, "Drop it! That's my son's inheritance." Behind her, 5 HOA board members formed a phalanx of windbreakers on my porch like a very beige SWAT team. It was 7:14 in the morning, the smell of pine resin in the air, and I was holding a screwdriver like it was Exhibit A in some bizarre property crime I didn't commit. One of the board members, a man in khakis so crisp they could stand up on their own, was actually taking photographs of me like I was vandalizing my own property. I'm Caleb Hart, quiet contractor, lover of creaky floors and wood that remembers winters I wasn't alive for. I bought the long-neglected Whitcomb Lodge, a 150-year-old cabin mansion, at a county tax auction. It sits just uphill from Hawthorne Crest, an HOA enclave where shutters are purely decorative and personalities are strictly matte. The place was a steal at $42,000 because nobody wanted to deal with the restoration work. Rotted sills, a collapsing back porch, windows so warped they whistled in the wind. But I saw potential where others saw problems. I saw hand-hewn beams and original wide plank floors that just needed someone to care. Enter Priscilla Dorn, HOA president and mother to Bradley Dorn, a realtor who lists houses like used cars, complete with aggressive pricing tactics and unnecessary exclamation points in every listing. Priscilla informed me from the curb on my second day of work, her voice dripping with entitlement, that Whitcomb Lodge spiritually belongs to Bradley and therefore to her. She stood there in her tennis whites, not a hair out of place, explaining that her grandmother's second cousin once knew someone who worked for the Whitcombs. I checked my deed, which did not mention spirituality anywhere in its legal language. It mentioned me, the county, and a perfectly legitimate tax sale. Nothing about spiritual ownership or destiny or whatever nonsense she was peddling for my property line. Priscilla's crusade began with paper cuts. Pastel notices for unapproved historical activity started appearing on my door, sometimes 2 or 3 a day. Then came a $500 fine for excessive period-appropriate charm, which I didn't even know was a violation. I called the county and they confirmed it wasn't a real violation. The HOA had no jurisdiction over my property whatsoever. She sent a cease and desist letter signed, bafflingly, the Architectural Committee and Son. The ampersand and Son part was handwritten in different ink. She staged heritage inspections where she'd stride in with a clipboard and shout questions at my rafters like they were hostile witnesses. Her voice would echo through the empty rooms as she demanded to know if I had permits for authenticity, for historical accuracy, for breathing near antique woodwork. I started documenting everything. Every notice, every visit, every bizarre claim. My lawyer, a patient woman named Rita who specialized in property disputes, told me to keep a log. She said people like Priscilla eventually hang themselves with their own rope if you just give them enough length. I didn't realize how literal that advice would become. Then came the signs. Bright yellow private park HOA members only signs, hammered into my lawn like she was colonizing Mars. I pulled them out. She put them back. This happened 4 times in 1 week. She circulated a newsletter claiming I'd stolen a family homestead and that the Dorns were direct Whitcomb heirs. The newsletter had a family tree that looked like it was drawn by someone who'd never seen an actual family tree. Lines went sideways, names were misspelled, and somehow Bradley was descended from 3 different Whitcomb siblings simultaneously. Bradley filmed TikToks on my stone steps, gesturing at the house like a game show prize while explaining to his followers how this was rightfully his family property. He'd do these dramatic pans of the facade while saying things like, "My ancestors built this with their bare hands." The Whitcombs had used professional builders, and the construction records were in the county archive. Someone zip-tied a chain across my drive. Someone, and I had a pretty good guess who, put a bright orange "Stop Work Unpermitted" sticker on my door with a fake county seal that featured a seagull. We are 3 hours from the ocean. When I pointed this out to my neighbor Tom, a retired teacher who'd lived in Hawthorne Crest for 20 years, he just shook his head and said Priscilla had tried to fine him once for having the wrong shade of beige on his shutters. I tried reasoning with her at first. I showed her my title documents, my purchase records, everything. She waved them away, saying with absolute conviction that paperwork doesn't override bloodlines. I pointed out that she couldn't prove any bloodline. She said the proof was in her heart and her family Bible. I asked to see the Bible. She said it was too precious to show strangers. The circular logic was dizzying. Then she started showing up during my work hours, just standing at the property line with her arms crossed, staring. It was unnerving. I'd be on a ladder replacing a window sash and there she'd be, silent and glaring like a suburban gargoyle. Priscilla went from petty to felony faster than I expected. She filed an affidavit of heirship at the recorder's office naming Bradley as the sole issue of the Whitcomb line. She attached a forged addendum to an 1890 deed and tried to record a lease pendens clouding my title. The lease pendens claimed there was a legal dispute over ownership and would have made it impossible for me to refinance or sell. That afternoon she let herself into the lodge through a side door I hadn't secured yet. I'd been focusing on the structural work and hadn't changed all the locks. My mistake. She staged a family portrait on the mantel, complete with flowers in a vase, and filmed a tearful video about our legacy. She kept saying our like she'd lived there her whole life, like she'd grown up running through these hallways. Unfortunately for her, the county recorder noticed the notary stamp belonged to a dead notary. The notary had been deceased for 7 years. The registrar, a sharp woman named Denise who'd worked in that office for 30 years, flagged it immediately and called a deputy. She told me later that she sees attempted fraud maybe twice a year, but this was the sloppiest she'd ever encountered. Also unfortunate for Priscilla, I'd installed motion cameras after the third trespassing incident. The trespasser with a fern brooch was captured in 4K resolution explaining to Bradley which rooms would show well once we reclaim it. She gave him a full tour of my property, discussing paint colors and furniture placement, pointing out which walls they'd knock down to open up the floor plan. The footage was almost comical. At one point she measured a doorway with a tape measure she'd brought specifically for this illegal tour. Bradley asked if they should stage it Scandinavian or farmhouse. She said farmhouse, definitely farmhouse, because that's what sells in this market. They were planning an entire interior design scheme for a house they didn't own and had obtained through fraud. I walked into the emergency hearing with my tax deed, title insurance, and the Whitcomb Foundation's letter confirming the last heir died in 1978 and donated any residual interest to a land trust, which later sold at auction. That's where I bought it. Clean, legal, documented. Rita had prepared a binder 3 inches thick. The judge asked Priscilla for probate papers. She produced the seagull seal again, presenting it like it was the crown jewels. She also had a printed family tree from some genealogy website, the kind you can edit yourself without verification. The county attorney, a stern man named Morrison who clearly didn't suffer fools, suppressed a laugh, then presented the notary registrar's report and my security footage. The courtroom went silent as they played the video. You could hear Priscilla's voice clearly explaining to Bradley how they'd price it once they took possession. She suggested $2.2 million. For my house. That I owned. The judge's face went from curious to stern in about 3 seconds. He granted a temporary restraining order, voided the fraudulent filings, and ordered the sheriff to remove HOA signage from my property forthwith. The preservation officer from the county, whose ringtone is literally a hammer sound, declared my project a model restoration. She'd been out twice to inspect my work and had nothing but praise for how I was maintaining historical integrity while updating systems to code. She stapled an official permit to my front post with the kind of ceremony that should have included trumpets. Priscilla's face went through several shades of red I didn't know were possible on human skin. Saturday morning, neighbors set out camp chairs as the sheriff's truck idled by my porch. This had become the neighborhood entertainment. Word had spread through Hawthorne Crest like wildfire. Even people from the next subdivision over showed up. Deputies peeled off the fake stop work sticker, loaded the HOA's trespass signs into the truck bed, and served Priscilla with charges. Filing a false instrument, criminal trespass, and attempted extortion. The fines she'd imposed were contingent on returning the house to her son. That made it extortion. She tried to pivot into a speech about community heritage, her voice getting higher and more desperate with each word. She talked about legacy and tradition and protecting the neighborhood character. But the prosecutor, a woman who looked like she'd heard every excuse in the book, rolled a cart-mounted TV into the cul-de-sac and played Priscilla's 4K tutorial on how to reclaim my foyer. The footage was damning. Her voice on the video, calm and calculating, explaining to Bradley exactly how they'd take possession once they forced me out through financial pressure and legal harassment. She'd laid out the whole strategy on camera in my living room. Applause broke out from the neighbors. Actual applause. Tom was clapping so hard I thought he might hurt himself. Bradley asked weakly if he could at least keep the content for his social media. The answer was no. The prosecutor said it was evidence in a criminal case and suggested he retain a lawyer for his real estate license hearing. The judge, who once clerked probate and knew property law inside and out, issued a permanent injunction barring Priscilla from my lot line by 50 feet. He ordered the HOA to pay my legal fees, which had climbed to $18,000. Then he added a $25,000 penalty to the county preservation fund. Priscilla's mouth fell open. She stammered that she didn't have that kind of money. The judge said coldly that she should have considered that before committing fraud and forgery. He added that her actions had wasted county resources and court time. He looked genuinely angry, which I'd been told was rare for him. The court sentenced her to 200 hours of community service under the supervision of the preservation officer, sanding and repainting Whitcomb Lodge's porch spindles in historically correct milk paint. She stood there in shock, her face pale, as the judge explained she'd be wearing a neon vest that reads volunteer, not an heir. Bradley's real estate license was placed under immediate review for misrepresentation of property interest and ethical violations. Priscilla finally broke, her voice cracking as she said this wasn't fair, that she was protecting family legacy. The judge told her the only thing she'd protected was her own ego, and now she'd pay the price for it. She sank into her chair, hands shaking, while Bradley stared at his phone like it might offer him an escape route that didn't exist.